The subsequent question is a slightly involved question, but I'll read it out and perhaps we can comment on it. And the question asks, if God is all-powerful, why does he permit people to suffer and children to starve to death? Either he cannot or he will not. If he cannot, he is not powerful. If he will not, he is evil. For both these reasons, the person thinks that God is therefore not worthy of being worshipped. I think that may be our Ahmadi viewers' interpretation of that. But perhaps the panel could just shed light on this question of God Almighty allowing suffering to occur.
Well, I think there are various angles from which this question can be discussed. It's a very involved question. But one thing is very simple, that a lot of problems that we see in this world, they cannot simply be all attributed to God directly like that. Like, for example, in case of earthquakes, people may say it is God's doing. But what about the lack of food, for example? People starving, they have mentioned there, some children starving there. Lack of food is not because God Almighty has not provided enough means of provision to the people today. Rather, they have been provided much greater at level as compared with the past. But still people are starving because of the maldistribution, because of the ill treatment, because of the biased distribution of that food items to the people. There are rich countries, they spend too much, they eat less and waste more, sometimes throwing into the seas. If the same food is sent to those people where people are starving, they would be much better off. So a lot of these problems are not simply to be attributed to God, rather they are man-made. They themselves have created, and then they simply throw the blame on God Almighty. There are different angles to that one. This is one angle which I mentioned.
Jazakallah. Dr. Saab, perhaps shedding further light on this, and is this perhaps a good opportunity to mention the concept of free will? And obviously this is a concept that we believe in as Muslims.
Yes, that's right. I mean, coming slightly back to that point, obviously these are man-made disasters, and they possibly outweigh the natural disasters that we have. So it is the imbalance that man has created which is leading to that. But certainly free will is something that Allah has pointed out to us, wrong and right, and it is for our own judgment to be able to distinguish between wrong and right, and that is where Allah has given us freedom. So I mean, when that has been done, then we have to raise the question of accountability. Obviously, if Allah has laid both parts to us, and we realize that this is the right path and that is the wrong path, then we will obviously be held accountable for our deeds on the day of judgment. And that is where freedom comes into our life, and that is what the day of judgment will be, that we were given this life, which was a trial for us, which was a test for us. We had these evil pulls as well, but what was our character like, and were we able to worship Allah as He had commanded us, and were we able to stay on the right path? Therefore, having had the free will, we were still able to make the right choice, and therefore we should be rewarded by Allah in that respect in the life after death.
I should mention before on this topic of free will, I should mention actually the subsequent question, which perhaps can be answered at the same time. Yes. And they said that if the answer comes back to this question of free will, he says, if you come back with the answer that it is to give us free will, in other words, God allows people to suffer because of free will, then how do you reconcile a small child dying in the torments of hunger and with this concept of free will? And she goes on to say that, is it worth the whole issue of free will to allow a child to die of hunger?
I think one thing that stems from that, and we have to be clear about it, is that life on this earth is a temporary abode, whereas the life to come is an everlasting abode. And if you consider about the creation of life, man has a very narrow-minded view of things around him. He only looks at what is there in front of him. Whereas if he was to look at the whole of the creation, then he would realize that this is part of the overall plan of Allah. And that therefore having this type of suffering is something that is perhaps temporary, whereas in the everlasting life, when that judgment is made, these factors will of course be taken into account by Allah, And that is the life that we all aim for, is that the good we do in this life, that is the everlasting life, and that is the life that is more that we should make ourselves work towards. So suffering in this life, in that respect, we have to take into account of a wider picture, that it is the everlasting life that we look forward to, and that is where we should look for our rewards from Allah.
Imam, so obviously we're saddened when we hear stories of perhaps a child starving to death or dying in with a natural disaster. I mean, obviously the recent events in Haiti are a case in point where natural disaster impact on people's lives, but perhaps you can shed further light on this concept of free will.
As I said, it's a very involved question and it needs a lot of deeper explanation. But the main point is that we have to see what is the divine plan of the whole creation. Allah Almighty has created so many good things, people forget. Each and every person who comes into this life, that has been given a lease of life by God Almighty. And the faculties, amenities, facilities, food, and all these sources of enjoyment, everything has been provided by that. The same God who has given us everything, He also says that I have created the death as well. خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. I have created the life and the death so that we can see and find out who is best in his deeds. That is to say, as Dr. Sahib pointed out rightly, that this life is not all that we are here. This is just a temporary life, a very temporary period of stay that we are spending here, compared with the life to come, which is eternal. This life on the planet would not be more than tip of the iceberg. A very small part is there, just less than a second even, that we are spending here, and the whole time is over there. So it should be taken in this way that people die, and everybody has to die. Sometime some people, they say innocent people have died, children have died, but there are some other people, maybe because of their bad doings, because of some punishment from God, for the things which they have immediately done or they might have done in the past. For any fault of them, that might be there. Or might be simply Allah Almighty wanted to create space for other people. If people think that, why these people have died or other people have died, the question is, why after all people die? Just imagine if the death has been taken away from the whole scheme of divine creation, then perhaps we do not have find this place to sit and to record this program. There will be so many people on this earth. If all the people since the creation of mankind, they are still there living, then perhaps nobody will find enough space to stand there. So this is something. But the point is to be remembered that the people, they have to leave this platform of this world sooner or later. But God Almighty says, the people whom I call beforehand, then of course they are not at all going to be penalized or punished because of the fact that they died like that. Rather, those people who die in accidents, they are, according to the Holy Quran, they are going to get more rewards. And that the life eternal to come, that is a place where they are going to be rewarded like that.
Jazakallah.